Emma's story. My parents skipped my graduation ceremony while flying my brother to an overseas trip. When my grandparents found out they were funding him while making me take loans, they cut them off. My name is Emma. I'm 22 years old. I was born and raised in Chicago in a family that seemed completely ordinary on the outside. My father was an electrician for a company that maintained office buildings, and my mother was a part-time bookkeeper for a small chain of local hardware stores. Our two-story, red brick house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood, not luxurious, but just enough to give the impression of a stable, decent home. Anyone looking in would say, two well-behaved children, kind parents. They must be a happy family. But there are things you can't see through a glass window. By the time I was 5, I already knew how to fold clothes, help my mother hang laundry, and soothe a baby to sleep. My younger brother Ethan was born with soft curls and big, bright eyes. From the moment he arrived, he was the family's little prince in every literal sense. I still remember his second birthday. My mother hired a decoration company to create a superhero-themed backdrop, complete with balloons, flashing lights, and a 3-tier cake. For my 8th birthday, my mom bought me a small cake from the corner store, placed it on the kitchen counter, and said, "You're a big girl now. Keep it simple. No need to make a fuss." At the time, I didn't feel sad. I even smiled, blew out the candles, and thanked my mother because I believed grown-ups always had their reasons. I was the older sister. I had to be the one who understood. I started carrying the weight of being the role model before I even had the chance to choose it. When Ethan was learning how to write, I was the one tutoring him. When my mom was busy with her bookkeeping, I was the one changing diapers, washing bottles, telling bedtime stories. I remember the nights I finished 6th grade homework while Ethan cried because he couldn't find his favorite toy. I had to search the whole house because my mother shouted from her bedroom, "You're the big sister. Go calm him down for me." Everyone in the family, even the relatives, followed this strange logic. Emma is so smart, so well-behaved. She doesn't need praise. Ethan, on the other hand, is fragile and needs more love. When I ranked first in the entire school, my mom just said, "Yeah, I know. You're always like that." When I won a full summer scholarship to a STEM academy for gifted students, my dad just sighed. "That's good, but don't make your brother feel pressured." One time, Ethan got a bad grade in history, and my mom took him out for ice cream to cheer him up. That same week, I won first place in a statewide essay competition. My mother looked at me and quietly said, "Congratulations, but don't brag too much in front of your brother." I started teaching myself how to shrink back, not because I didn't want to share my success, but because every time I shone, Ethan seemed to shrink further into the shadows, and my mother would look at me as if I were heartless. I learned to do well without drawing attention. I got used to submitting scholarship applications on my own, researching how to write personal statements, and quietly signing up for extracurriculars because no one ever asked me what I was preparing for. Meanwhile, Ethan failed his college entrance exams 2 years in a row. Yet my parents rewarded him with a trip to Miami to relieve stress. I didn't understand, but I stayed silent. I always stayed silent. I remember one Friday evening, when I had just finished a 15-page science presentation, Ethan burst through the door excitedly announcing that his new YouTube video had gotten 3,000 views. My dad clapped. "That's amazing. My boy is going to be famous." My mom hugged him and said, "You always know how to make us smile." I stood there holding my printed presentation in hand, my throat tightening. No one asked how my project went. No one remembered that I had spent 2 sleepless weeks writing just to meet the deadline. And I started to wonder, was I asking for too much? Was I being selfish for wanting a compliment, a hug, a proud glance? But the older I got, the clearer it became. Love isn't a reward reserved for the one who needs to be comforted. It's the bare minimum every child deserves, no matter how strong, mature, or low maintenance they may be. But in my family, Ethan was always the one who came first because he needs encouragement. And me? I had to be the one who sets an example, knows how to sacrifice. There were things my mother said that stayed with me, like scars. You're the older sister, so it's supposed to be like this. Ethan is the one who needs support. You've already got what you want, so what's the harm in letting your brother have a little? You don't need to worry. We trust you. That's why we need to focus on Ethan first. Trusting me meant leaving me behind. Trusting me meant no longer checking in. But if you stop paying attention, is it still trust or neglect? I started to wonder if I weren't so capable, so hardworking, so responsible. Would they love me the way they loved Ethan? But I never had the courage to stop trying because in that house, if I didn't play the part of the model older sister, who else would? I still remember the day I got my acceptance email from Northwestern University. It was an early spring afternoon. The Chicago sky was still drizzling, but inside me, it felt like the middle of July. I cried when the word "congratulations" flashed on the screen. I had chosen a computer science major most of my friends found dry, but to me, it was my chance to step out of the invisible shadow I'd been living under. The school offered me a partial scholarship, enough to cover half the tuition. The rest housing, books, insurance, food, I would have to take care of on my own. That evening, I printed the acceptance letter, placed it neatly on the dining table, brewed a pot of chamomile tea, and braced myself, hoping to hear my mother say, "We're proud of you." But the moment I finished speaking, the kitchen went silent. My mother picked up the paper, glanced at it for a few seconds, then put it down and asked, "So it's only a partial scholarship?" I nodded. My father let out a sigh and, in a tone that sounded like a moral lecture, said, "It's good to be independent. College is the time to learn how to take responsibility for your own life." There were no offers to help, no family discussions or plans, just a few quiet nods and a final simple statement. If you can manage it, go. If not, stay home and find something that fits your situation. And so, I started calculating everything. I found a rented room 45 minutes by bus from campus, cheaper than the dorms. I got a morning shift job at a local coffee shop starting at 5:30 a.m., which meant I had to wake up at 4:45. After work, I'd rush to catch the bus back to campus to make it in time for my 9 a.m. classes. In the evenings, I tutored the 8th grade daughter of one of my mother's friends, helping with math and English essay writing. On Saturdays and Sundays, I wrote freelance articles for a website that taught study skills to college students. I didn't complain, not because I wasn't exhausted, but because I didn't believe anyone would listen. I chose silence and busyness because that was the only way I knew how not to feel left behind. Meanwhile, Ethan failed his US college entrance exams. My mother said, "He's not suited for high-pressure environments." My father nodded. "He's more creatively inclined." And just 2 months later, the entire family posted pictures sending Ethan off to London to study graphic design at a private international academy. Not prestigious, but outrageously expensive. I froze when I saw the Instagram story. My mom posted a photo of Ethan at the airport pulling a black suitcase with a caption that read, "My son is off to Europe for his studies. Wishing him the most beautiful journey ahead." At that exact moment, I was behind the bar at the cafe, holding a warm milk jug, trying to keep my tears from falling into the cappuccino I was foaming. I wasn't jealous, I just didn't understand. I didn't understand how someone who failed his exams, who never had to worry about anything, could be celebrated like he had just won an international scholarship. And me, the one who scraped by on every GPA point and dollar earned, was treated like I had already had too much. I overheard once, just bits and pieces from my mother's phone calls with my grandmother, that Ethan's tuition cost nearly $40,000 a year. My parents didn't require him to get a part-time job. Every month they still wired him money for housing and living expenses, and even sent a little extra so he could experience student life abroad the right way. For me, it was the opposite. There were times when I had exactly $14 left in my account to last the entire week. I had to calculate every cup of coffee I bought, every used textbook I rented from an upperclassman. I cut my meals down to just 2 a day. And still, I regularly sent money back home whenever my mom called and said, "It's a bit tight this month." I remember once asking her, "Mom, what if I can't come up with enough for next semester's tuition?" She was quiet for a long moment, then sighed and said, "Well, maybe take fewer classes next term. Work a little more. You're smart, you'll figure it out." I smiled, nodded, and didn't ask anything else. But that night I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, wondering why my being smart had become the excuse for them to stop loving me. Eventually, I came to my own conclusion. In that house, I had always been the one who could take care of herself, and Ethan had always been the one who needed help. The favoritism wasn't about them disliking me, it was that they never saw me as someone who needed them. And if a person lives their whole life without asking for anything, they'll soon be treated like someone who doesn't need love either. So, I picked up more work online tutoring, paid surveys for academic studies. I even wrote content for a fitness studio I'd never set foot in. I worked so much that I often forgot to eat, forgot what it felt like to rest. But I kept going because I knew that if I didn't take care of myself, no one would. And that was the price of getting an education, the price of being the model daughter, the independent one, the one who never caused any trouble. There were days I felt like a machine running on an endless loop with no off switch. I opened my eyes at 4:45 a.m., blindly reaching for my phone in the dark to silence the alarm. I splashed cold water on my face to shock myself awake, changed into my cafe uniform, threw on an old hoodie, and biked through the thin morning mist to work. The morning shift started at 5:30 when the whole neighborhood was still asleep. I brewed dozens of espresso shots, washed cups, wiped counters, and sometimes got snapped at by customers for forgetting a shot of caramel syrup or being 30 seconds late with a breakfast sandwich. By 8:15, I was rushing to change clothes behind the bar, stuffing my notebooks into my backpack, and sprinting to catch the bus to campus. Classes ran from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., packed with statistics, Python programming, introductory machine learning, and mandatory philosophy. An exhausting maze that left barely any time for lunch. On lucky days, a few classmates forced me to sit down and share their extra sandwiches. After school, I dashed to the tutoring center where I taught 3 students, a 7th grader, an AP student, and a college freshman struggling with probability theory. When the sessions ended, I went back to my barely 20 square meter rental room, cooked a pack of instant noodles, maybe cracked an egg into it if I had earned a tip that day. After dinner, I sat at my tiny desk, opened my laptop, and typed through the night group assignments, data analysis projects, unpaid research work for a professor I hoped would one day write me a recommendation letter for an internship. Most nights, I didn't get to sleep until 1 a.m. Then the cycle began again. I lived on caffeine and sheer determination. But somehow, no one in my family ever asked me the most basic question, "Are you okay?" Or even something as simple as, "What did you eat today?" My mother still called, but usually to say things like, "The electric bill's really high this month. Can you send me a little more?" Or, "Your brother wants a new set of art supplies. I haven't got the money together yet. Can you cover it for now?" Occasionally, my father would text me too. "Emma, can you check how much it costs to replace brake pads at the auto shop?" No one asked if I was still getting enough sleep. No one noticed that with every video call, my face looked more hollow, my eyes sinking deeper. I remember clearly the day I fainted in class. It was during a presentation for data structures. I had just finished my part when everything went dark. I heard distant voices calling my name. I woke up in the campus health center, dizzy and soaked in sweat. The nurse asked me when I'd last eaten. I couldn't remember. She offered to call a family member. I gave her my mother's number. An hour later, I received a message. Don't exaggerate. You need to stay strong like always. I'm busy figuring out next month's rent. I stared at the screen. It wasn't that my heart hurt, it just went empty. A kind of emptiness that had no name. I smiled, nodded my thanks to the nurse, told her I was okay, and walked out of the health center on my own. That was the moment I realized I had become the kind of person even I believed should just endure. I stopped at the vending machine in the hallway, thinking I'd buy a bottle of orange juice, but my hand froze. My bank account showed exactly $6. If I bought the juice, I wouldn't have enough for dinner. I pressed cancel. I sat down on a wooden bench, leaned against the wall, and looked up at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I just breathed one long breath as if trying to tuck all my feelings into some hidden corner of my chest. Then I stood up, walked back, and kept studying, kept working, kept living like everything was fine. Because I had learned if I didn't hold everything together, it would all collapse. Not the world, just my own life. After that day, I started tracking my spending in an Excel file. I cut every non-essential expense. I asked for more tutoring hours and even accepted jobs I once thought I'd never have to take, handing out flyers, manually entering data, and some nights writing product descriptions for an online cosmetics store, pretending to be a happy customer, posting fake reviews. I didn't do any of that to prove how strong I was. I did it because I had no other choice. My parents had chosen to send money so Ethan could pursue his passion the right way. And me, the one living on whatever I could piece together, was simply expected to figure it out. The only thing that kept me going was the fragile belief that if I made it through, I would escape. I would have a life where I didn't have to brace myself just to exist. I would have enough not to show off, but just so I'd never have to choose between orange juice and dinner again. And if one day I had a family of my own, I would never let any of my children believe they had to prove themselves worthy of love. I spent the entire week before graduation preparing. Even though my schedule was suffocating with work, classes, and final exams, I still carefully printed each invitation by hand, sketched a map of the campus seating area for guests, and marked the closest parking spots. I booked a table at a small Italian restaurant by Lake Michigan, warm yellow lighting. A simple but elegant menu. I had saved for nearly 2 months, just to make the reservation for 4 people. In my mind, I had pictured it all. My mother would wear the light purple floral dress she always saved for special occasions. My father would wear a white button-down shirt, probably wrinkled but still decent. Ethan would surely post a photo of the whole family with me, captioned, "So proud of my sister." I knew it might not happen, but I still hoped. Sometimes it's hope itself that keeps us moving forward, even when our hearts are too tired to try. The night before the ceremony, I sent a message in our family group chat. Graduation starts at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Your seats are in Section A, Row D, Seats 3. I've printed the invitations. You can pick them up at check-in. Lunch reservation is at 12:15. Don't forget a jacket. It might be chilly. I'm really looking forward to seeing you all. My mother read the message 15 minutes later, but there was no reply, not a single emoji, not a word of acknowledgement. I stared at my phone for a long time, then set it down, telling myself, maybe they were tired. Maybe tomorrow morning they'd come. The next morning, I woke up early. Chicago was covered in fog, tiny droplets clinging to the window as if whispering something quietly sad. I tied my shoes, adjusted my collar, smoothed out my navy blue graduation gown, and carried the bouquet of purple tulips I'd bought myself the day before, after finishing my last shift at work. I still remember how it felt to walk out of that flower shop, holding them in my hands like I was grasping for a tiny sliver of affection I had never fully received. At the school entrance, graduates gathered in groups, some laughing, some posing for pictures, others hugging their families. The smell of hot coffee from a nearby vendor mixed with the air, familiar like the mornings I used to work. I walked through the crowd, gripping the bouquet tightly, my eyes scanning for a familiar face. I saw no one. I called my mother. 3 rings, then voicemail. I sat down in my assigned seat. The 3 chairs next to mine were empty. The seats for family. Maybe they're on their way, I told myself again. I tried not to look at the time. Tried not to notice the sympathetic glances from the students around me when they saw I was alone. But then my phone buzzed. A notification lit up the lock screen. Laura Carter just posted a new photo. My hand trembled. I opened Facebook. The first picture that appeared was Ethan standing next to Big Ben, holding up a plane ticket, beaming. The caption underneath read, "Our youngest son just landed in London. So proud. Hashtag Ethan goes global." I read the sentence over and over, no typos, no missing emotion, just missing me. Today was my graduation day. And yet, in my mother's heart, the event worth celebrating was Ethan going to London. Me graduating with honors, after 4 years of juggling work and study, worn thin and exhausted, wasn't even worth a mention. I closed my phone and slid it into my coat pocket. No tears fell. I had cried too many times to believe they'd help now. The host began calling students by department. I stood still, holding my bouquet of tulips. When I stepped onto the stage, I heard my name read out over the microphone. Emma Carter, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, magna cum laude. Applause echoed faintly. No one called my name from the stands. No one waved. No one lifted a camera. I walked straight to the center of the stage, bowed to accept my diploma, and turned to step down. I still smiled. A tight, restrained smile, like a mask covering the scream buried deep inside. As I stepped off the stage, a volunteer reached out to congratulate me. I nodded, thanked her. I walked past students hugging their parents, mothers crying from joy, fathers holding their phones high, recording every step their daughters took. I quietly exited the ceremony area, crossed the lawn, and made my way to the familiar bus stop. I canceled the lunch reservation. The deposit was non-refundable. It didn't matter. Back in my room, I took off my gown and hung it like a decoration. Nothing more than an ornament now. Not the symbol of the battle I had fought. I placed the bouquet on the table, lay down on my bed, and stared at the ceiling. Maybe I had hoped for too much. But in that silence, something struck me. I hadn't walked across that stage for anyone else's approval. I had made it through 4 years on my own. No hand to hold, no one to catch me. And if I had come this far without anyone by my side, then I could keep going. Without applause, without proof, with only one thing that mattered. I won't give up. Sometimes the very moment you realize you're truly alone is the moment you finally begin to grow. And today, on that crowded stage, I knew I had grown up. Not because of the applause, but because of the silence. I returned to my room after the ceremony in suffocating quiet. No phone calls, no congratulatory messages, no flowers except the bouquet of tulips I bought for myself. When I walked into the small room I'd lived in for the past 3 years, my roommate, Sarah, was sitting by the window reading. She looked up, smiled brightly, and said, "Congratulations." "Oh my God, you did it." I forced a smile, nodded. "Thank you." Then I placed my graduation cap on the table, hung up the gown, and slowly removed the tiny earrings I'd worn since my first day of college, the only birthday gift I still had from when I was 16. Sarah walked over, gently took my diploma from my hand, and softly asked, "Where's your family?" I looked at her. 1 second. 2. Then I shook my head. I said nothing. That was all. And Sarah didn't ask anything else. Maybe she understood some answers don't need words. The entire week after, I didn't say a word about graduation. I didn't post any pictures, didn't share any moments, didn't tell anyone about the empty seats or my mother's Facebook caption with the hashtag Ethan goes global. I stayed silent the way I always had until one Friday morning as I was on my way to a summer internship interview, my phone rang. It was my mother, the first call since graduation. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly put in my earbuds and answered. Her voice came through, soft as always. "Hi, honey. Have you been busy these past few days?" I wanted to say I had just graduated, that I had walked through one of the most important days of my life with no one by my side, but I only replied, "I'm okay." "Do you need something?" She paused for a moment, then cleared her throat. "Well, I wanted to ask if you had a little extra money. Ethan ran out of cash over there. London is so expensive. I was hoping you could send him around $500, just enough to get him through the next few weeks." I froze on the sidewalk, staring at the traffic passing in front of me. Strangers walked by holding coffee cups, listening to music, laughing, and there I was, standing in the middle of a city I had carved out piece by piece, feeling like I'd been yanked straight back into that empty graduation seat. I took a deep breath. For the first time, I didn't say no, but I also didn't stay silent. I asked, "Mom, why is it always me who has to give?" The energy on the other end shifted. Her voice dropped, no longer gentle. "You're starting again. Always comparing. You have everything. You're smart, independent, on scholarship. You have a job. Your brother is sensitive. He needs more support." I heard each word like tiny knives, slow and precise, cutting into my chest. I wanted to scream. "I need love, too." But my throat tightened. Instead, I let out a dry, brittle laugh. I got that scholarship because I had to. I work because no one helps me. Just because I survived doesn't mean I'm not hurting. She cut me off. "That was your choice. You chose that path. Don't come back now blaming everyone else." I looked up at the sky, eyes squinting in the sunlight, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just asking one thing, something no one in this family has ever answered in 22 years. Have I ever been loved just for being me?" Silence. A long, heavy pause. Then her voice came back, sharp and defensive. "You're getting more and more disrespectful. You think just because you've done something now you can look down on your family? Did you forget who raised you?" I closed my eyes and exhaled. "I never forgot. But maybe you've never remembered me the way I needed to be remembered." And that's when my father took the phone. His voice was harsh, his tone biting. "You're just getting dumber the more you study. Ungrateful. From now on, if you want to handle life on your own, then do it. Don't call us again." The call ended. I stood still on the sidewalk, the sound of traffic blending with the thunder in my chest. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I only felt something inside me lift, like a weight I'd carried since childhood had finally slipped off my shoulders. That was the first time I dared to ask, and the last time I ever waited for an apology. That night, I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and transferred Ethan $500. Not because my mother asked, but because I wanted to end it cleanly, quietly, completely on my own terms. In the note field, I typed just 4 words: "Make it enough." Then I blocked my family's bank account, turned off my phone, and deleted every photo of them from my device. Not because I was angry, but because I needed to start over, a new chapter where I no longer had to strain myself just to prove that I deserved something everyone should receive without asking: care. 2 weeks after the final call from my parents, I returned to my hometown to visit my grandparents. Their small wooden house still nestled quietly beneath old oak trees in the suburbs of Bloomington, Indiana, just as peaceful as the last time I had been there. The scent of aged wood and herbal tea drifted from the front porch, calming something inside me. There were no hectic class schedules here, no texts asking for money, no voices telling me, "You're the older sister, so you have to give in." Just 2 elderly people whose eyes always held warmth and whose trembling hands were still ready to make me tea. Even though I hadn't been a child for a long time, Grandma picked me up from the bus station in her worn wool coat. She hugged me tightly, like every hug could be the last. Grandpa was sitting on the porch reading the paper. When he saw me, he folded it, grabbed his cane, and stood up with surprising speed. I sat between them, listening to stories about the neighborhood, about the neighbor's cat who had 3 new kittens, about Mr. Jones opening a fresh produce stall near the gas station. We ate dinner early as usual. Grandma made roasted salmon with vegetables and creamy cauliflower soup, the dishes I had loved since I was little. While I was helping myself to another spoonful of rice, she asked gently, without any hint of judgment, "I heard the whole family went to Europe. What about you? How was graduation?" I looked up. For a second, I was ready to smile and lie like I always did. It was great, really warm. But I stopped. I didn't know why, but this time I couldn't pretend. I looked at her, then at Grandpa. 2 people who once taught me how to tell right from wrong, how to stand up to bullies, how to understand that my worth was never tied to pleasing others. I took a breath, set down my chopsticks, and slowly told them everything. That no one from my family came to my graduation. That my parents had flown Ethan to London that very morning. That I had made all the arrangements myself, booked a table, printed invitations, prepared every detail, that I stood alone in the middle of campus. I told them about the bouquet I bought, about the empty seats beside me, about the caption my mother posted when Ethan landed in London at the exact moment I stepped on stage. I didn't add drama. I wasn't angry. I just told it like a slow-motion film. The air in the kitchen thickened. Grandma stopped eating, her hands trembling on the table. Grandpa furrowed his brow and sat silent for a long while before finally asking, "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Your parents didn't help at all." I smiled, but in that smile was a whole ocean of bitterness. "Grandpa, I did ask, but every time the answer was, 'You're smart. You can handle it.'" I paused, then added, "Actually, I took out a student loan in my second year. I worked every kind of job, and Ethan's tuition, I think they paid all of it." Grandpa turned to Grandma, his face hardening, his voice turning hoarse. "Didn't we send Laura money every month? Said it was to support both kids through college." Grandma nodded, her eyes welling. "We sent $1,200 every month. Laura said it was to help Emma and Ethan with their education." "We didn't know." I froze. $1,200 a month for 3 years while I was eating instant noodles, juggling 5 jobs, living in a cheap rental with no heating, wearing the same winter coat year after year. Grandpa sighed, his voice suddenly heavy, each word falling like stones into the pit of my chest. "So, our grandchild was being used to fund the one who was favored." Grandma turned away, hiding her face, now wet with tears. She didn't sob, just quietly wiped her eyes and took my hand in hers. "It's our fault. We should have asked. We should have looked more closely. We should have noticed how thin you got, how tired you looked. But we only saw the photos Laura sent, pictures of Ethan all dressed up, studying art in London. Laura told us you were too busy to take pictures." I didn't blame them. I simply shook my head and said softly, "No one's at fault." I used to believe that if I stayed silent and worked hard, I'd eventually be seen. But I've learned that if you stay silent too long, people forget you have a voice. Grandpa placed his hand on my shoulder. The grip wasn't tight, but it was firm. "No, Emma. It's not because you stayed silent. It's because they refused to listen. But from now on, I will listen. Grandma will listen. And we won't let anyone forget you again." Dinner ended in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind. It was the kind that comes after someone learns the truth and is gathering the courage to right the wrongs that have quietly built up over the years. After the meal, Grandma brought out a savings book. I recognized it immediately. It was the one they used to set aside scholarship funds for their grandchildren. They had once said both Ethan and I would share in it. She opened it and pulled out a slip. "Starting this month, we'll stop sending money to Laura. From now on, we'll support you directly, whether you need it or not. Not because you're weak, but because you deserve it." I said nothing, but this time it was because I was overwhelmed. I didn't need the money, I didn't need the support, but for the first time in my life, I saw someone look at me as if I, too, were a child worthy of being loved. That night, lying on the small bed in the old attic room, I couldn't fall asleep right away. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind slip through the window frame, and I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever happened next, I was no longer alone. And from that moment on, I decided I would no longer be silent. Not to accuse anyone, but to stand up for myself. Because sometimes all it takes is one person seeing you for you to begin again. News of my grandparents cutting off financial support didn't take long to reach my mother. Just 2 days after I left Bloomington and returned to the city, I received a phone call from her at nearly 10 p.m., an hour she usually never bothered me. I was cleaning up my desk after a tutoring session when the phone rang. Seeing her name on the screen, my heart sank like an old wave was pulling me back into the deep water I had just escaped. I picked up. Before I could say a word, her voice rang out, cold and furious. "What did you say to your grandparents?" I stayed silent, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was carefully choosing words that wouldn't hurt me any more than necessary. She continued, louder now. "Do you realize we've lost everything? They said they'll only support you now. They said you told them everything. Do you understand what you've done, Emma?" I stayed silent, gripping the phone in my hand. What filled my mind wasn't guilt, but a strange kind of feeling, like watching a house you used to live in burn down from the outside. No more pain, just emptiness. She didn't wait for my reply. Her voice cracked now. "You aired our dirty laundry. This family raised you, gave you everything, and you go running off telling lies. You're ungrateful, a traitor like you. You'll regret this." I closed my eyes. Her words hit like stones thrown straight at my mind. And yet, strangely, I didn't feel hurt the way I used to. Maybe because for the first time, I realized I no longer stood inside their drawn circle. I answered gently, my voice low but clear. "No one betrayed anyone." "Mom, I just stopped being silent." "Silence?" She said nothing else. The call ended with a long, cold beep, just like the years I spent in that house where my sacrifices were treated as expected and my pain was seen as weakness. A few days later, Grandpa reached out, not by phone, but through a letter. He always said handwritten words meant more than 100 texts. Inside the envelope, I found a letter written in blue ink, the handwriting slightly slanted, steady, and familiar. "Emma, your grandma and I have thought this through. Starting tomorrow, all educational support funds, as well as the inheritance we plan to split between you and your brother, will go to you in full. Not because we are playing favorites, but because you deserve it. No one should be asked to keep sacrificing after they've already carried too much. This is not a reward. This is how we make things right. You have the right to learn, to live, and to be free from the feeling that you must always give up something in order to be loved. We love you, Grandma and Grandpa." I sat still for a long time, holding the letter in my hands as if it were the first certificate in my life that proved I had been seen. Not for my grades, not for my independence, but simply for being me. A few days later, I received an email from the family attorney confirming that my grandparents had rewritten their will. A piece of land worth nearly $300,000, along with the educational support fund originally meant to be split between Ethan and me, would now be listed solely in my name. In the note, my grandparents had written, "Ethan has already received ample opportunity. Now it's time for Emma to choose her own path without having to borrow or sacrifice to get there." I didn't know whether I should feel happy or sad. I just felt lighter, as if someone had finally stood beside me, not to fight my battles, but simply to say, "You weren't wrong for wanting to be loved fairly." My mother didn't call again. A week later, my father sent me a short text. "Good. Handle it yourself like you wanted." I read that message while sitting in the library of my old university, the same place I had fallen asleep over countless books, countless nights. I put my phone down, leaned back in my chair, and nodded quietly to myself. Yes, I'll handle it. But not because no one will help this time, because I know freedom isn't about not needing anyone. Freedom is living in alignment with your worth and never again needing to prove that you deserve to exist. That was the moment I realized not every severance is a loss. Some severances are rebirth. I began a completely new chapter of my life in San Francisco, where the fog drapes across the hills and skyscrapers rise like dreams built by people who never stopped dreaming big. My first job was at a data analytics startup focused on user behavior. The office wasn't fancy, didn't have an ocean view, but the air inside always felt warm, like it was heated by the passion of young people who still believed that numbers could mean something real. I was the only woman on the product team. In the beginning, I carried the old doubt with me, the instinct to prove myself, to earn my right to speak. But for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. Here, people truly listened. Not because you were special, but because here, you were naturally part of the conversation. And that was enough for me to stop feeling like someone who had barged into someone else's table. Have you ever been treated like love in your family was something to be rationed, but no one ever really saw you? Have you ever sat in a room full of relatives and still felt like a stranger? Have you ever had to carry the weight of proving yourself just to avoid being forgotten? If you have, you're not alone. I've walked that path. I've sat in those empty chairs. I've bought flowers for myself. But I've also learned this. Love is not a reward for those who suffer the best. It's a basic human need, and you deserve it simply because you exist. Leave your city or country in the comments. Tell me if you've ever walked alone. Ever asked yourself, am I even worthy of love? Because I want to know you. Not to comfort you, but to tell you this. There's a world out there that is still listening, and you are not alone. Because sometimes the truth needs to be said, even if it makes others uncomfortable. And only when you dare to speak what no one wants to hear, can you finally begin to live your own life. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to forgive,